Joining us here is an 11-year veteran of the National Football League and a Super Bowl champion of his time with the New York Giants. Now making a very nice name for himself at ESPN. Chris Canty here on the program. Good to see you, Chris.
Hey, Rich, thanks for having me on. I tell you, you put me in a tough spot. I'm following up my former teammate that's a Hall of Famer, and then after me, you got one of the most famous comedians in the game right now. It's a tough spot you got me in today.
Listen, I know. Listen, I'm a Staten Islander, and the Boogie Down Bronx is in the house, if I'm not mistaken, right now. So,
you already know.
You got thick skin. you have thick skin. Did you root for the Giants as a kid, Chris?
No, I didn't root for the Giants. That was my dad's team. I really wasn't a big football fan, if I'm being honest. I was all about those hoop dreams, being a tall kid from the Bronx. The Los Angeles Lakers were my squad. Don't ask me how that happened. But it wasn't until later on in high school where I came to love football, and turned out to be a pretty good decision for me.
Well, I mean, that was North Carolina, right? You moved to North Carolina in high school, and that's when you started really ascending into the Chris Canty we see here today, correct?
That's correct. The same high school that Daniel Jones went to. So
okay. All right. For the radio audience, did you inhale and then kind of
there was a slight pause.
There's a slight pause and a
sigh.
Do we see the sigh right there?
Little pregnant pause. Things didn't get off to the start that we hoped for DJ. As a former Giant and a fellow Charlotte Latin alum, I'm rooting for the guy, but I can tell you it's an uphill climb for that guy right now.
What is going on? What do you think? What is going on with him and the G-men? Chris, what do you think?
It's hard to explain, Rich. All I can say is the turnover that he threw, the pick six in the third quarter, the interception in the fourth quarter are just mistakes that a quarterback in his sixth season can't make. And at some point, DJ is going to have to live up to the contract the Giants gave him a couple of years ago. And you got to understand that this place really, really doesn't give you a lot of runway when you don't give them a lot to hold on to in the way of tangible results. So I think that's the problem that Daniel Jones is now facing. And there's a lot of show and prove. And on top of that, you've got that contract that's out there. And the New York Giants are going to be in the unenviable position because of the injury history with Daniel Jones. If things continue to trend the way that they're trending, where they're going to have to make a difficult decision.
Well, I don't know how difficult it is, right? I mean, because the contract is something that is caused them to start him this year, right? And the fact that they didn't get a quarterback in the draft, that they sat there at sixth and I guess did their evaluation of J.J. McCarthy, Penix, and Neighbors and said, let's go with the receiver. And do our best to win with Daniel Jones this year, and maybe things can get, boosted. Certainly with Saquon being allowed to walk down the turnpike, right? I mean, but if it doesn't work out this year, the question is how many changes would this team make? Quite frankly.
Well, Rich, I think you're as loyal as your options. And the Giants didn't draft a quarterback, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. And we saw that all play out on Hard Knocks. That couldn't have felt good if you were Daniel Jones. But he's got an opportunity to show and prove. They've invested a lot in the offensive line. They've invested heavily on the defensive side of the ball, especially in their front seven. You're looking at it now and you're saying, yeah, you don't have Saquon Barkley, but we did draft a receiver in the top 10. At some point, you're going to have to be a force multiplier. You're going to have to elevate the play of those around him. And it just hasn't happened for DJ. The best season that this guy has on his resume, you're talking about 15 touchdown passes and him playing in all the regular season games. At some point, there's got to be something else at the top of the resume in order to convince Giants fans and convince the front office that he's the guy for them moving forward.
So I'm going to ask you, Chris Canty, here on the Rich Eisen Show, the same question I asked DeMarcus, where he had 9 seasons of the 28 in a row that the Cowboys have not made the NFC Championship game. You had half of that before you moved on to the Giants and then eventually the Ravens, because this is essentially even with what we saw against Cleveland and how impressive they were, my essential take was great stuff. They deserve the kudos for doing that, but whatever. Like, let's see it when it all comes down to it. When you were a young player there in Dallas, did you know of how long it had been and how each mounting year just adds the pressure? Because it was only about 10 years since the streak had begun when you first arrived. I'm just wondering how much this is in the frontal or back lobes of the current Dallas Cowboys right now, Chris?
Rich, I didn't even think about it when I got to Dallas. I was a 4th round pick. I was just trying to do enough to stay in the league, stay on the team. And Bill Parcells did a really good job of keeping everybody focused on the task at hand and not looking too far down the road. So I don't think a lot of people that were on those teams from 2005 through 2008 paid much attention to it. Now, certainly when we made the playoffs in 2006 and 2007, there was a lot of chatter. And when you have 13 Pro Bowlers on a team, there are going to be expectations. When you're the number one seed in the NFC, there are going to be expectations. But I will say this. I think when we start talking about the pressure and the expectations in Dallas, we have to look at the owner, Jerry Jones, and what he does in terms of impacting the autonomy of the head coach and empowering him and the leaders within that locker room in order to set the agenda for the team. And the one thing that I will say is that for all of the good things that Jerry Jones does, it feels like in a lot of his negotiations and a lot of the bluster and a lot of him stirring the pot, he undermines the head coach and the leadership structure on his own football team. And that doesn't necessarily lend itself to getting the best out of your team when you need it the most. If you think back to when they lost that playoff game against the Green Bay Packers last year, team leader Tank Lawrence said after the game that they were too burnt out, that they didn't have the energy to be ready for that playoff game, that kind of intensity. Well, the only thing that I can take away from that is that cauldron that Jerry Jones creates with all of the headlines impacts in ways on the team as they go through the regular season. So again, I think a lot of the issues that we're seeing from the Dallas Cowboys, they're not for the lack of having talent. Will McClay, their senior personnel director, does a great job of being able to buy the groceries. It's about the culture that's in the building. And unfortunately, it's not the head coach. It's not the leadership structure within the team. It's Jerry Jones setting the culture. And that's the only common denominator that can explain the 28-year NFC Championship game drought.
Interesting. So let me ask you to put a little bit more meat on that right there, Chris, because I'm sure there are some fans hearing you say what you just said that would push back to say Tank Lawrence is a lead pipe wielding professional player, as are the rest of the Dallas Cowboys, many of whom are very well compensated. And playoff rubber meeting the road, how do you not find the energy within you? How do you not overcome whatever cauldron has been cooked up like it's go time? So why would that happen is what I'm saying. Like would you say the cauldron being created by Jerry Jones does defray somebody's ability to dig deep?
Rich, I couldn't tell you. I'm not in that locker room. All I can go on is what the players say. And when Tank Lawrence says something, I'm going to pay attention to it, especially when it's a player as veteran as he is, saying he was too, quote unquote, burnt out to be ready to go in a playoff game when you're competing for a championship at home versus what was the youngest playoff team in the last half century. So I was surprised to hear that. But when I take those comments and we start looking at some of the shortcomings for the Dallas Cowboys over the last 3 years, where they've had 12 wins in each regular season, where they've lost 2 of the 3 playoff L's that they've taken at home on their own field, I have to look at what's going on at the top of the organization. They always say a fish rots from the head down, and that's exactly what it feels like down in Dallas. Now, again, Jerry Jones is a wildly successful businessman. He's taken a $140 million investment and turned it into a $10 billion business. So it's hard to sit here and say that Jerry is doing it wrong. But when it comes to creating the kind of culture that will allow your team to contend at a championship level, there is something that is missing within the culture of the Dallas Cowboys. There is that intangible that just isn't there. And I point to the little things within the margins, and those little things happen to be some of the big headlines that Jerry Jones creates around his team.
ESPN and ESPN Radio's Chris Canty, a few minutes left with him here on the Rich Eisen Show. And let's, I guess, just finish up the teams you played for. Your takeaway from the Ravens' season-opening loss and near win in Kansas City is what?
Lamar Jackson is really good. The offensive line needs some work. I think that's the biggest takeaway. They've got to figure out a way to keep Lamar Jackson out of longer downs and distances where he can be hit by the defense by virtue of the pass rush or him just having to take off and create. I think that's got to be the biggest thing. You saw he started out this week a little bit banged up, missed some time on the field. And so that is my biggest concern. When Lamar Jackson is fully healthy, you know the Ravens are going to be in the playoffs. You know they're going to be competing to be in the championship rounds. It's just a matter of making sure that he gets to the finish line healthy. I have no doubt that if he's healthy, he plays in the majority of the games, the rest of it will take care of itself. But the biggest concern, as I see it for John Harbaugh in Baltimore, is making sure that they take care of number 8. He'll take care of them if they do.
Okay, and so what you gave a theory as to why the Cowboys run out of gas when it comes time to win in the playoffs. What's your theory on why we've yet to see Lamar break through into a Super Bowl despite having 2 MVPs under his belt now, including last year? What do you see maybe as a system function that's going on or malfunction that's happening so far, Chris?
Well, earlier on in his career, I thought they put a lot on Lamar in terms of playmaking. They didn't necessarily give him a lot of weapons that can take some of the heavy lifting off of him. When it comes to what happened in the conference championship game last year, I think the Ravens just went through an identity crisis. Anytime you have, 16 runs and only, 8 or 9 of them coming from guys that weren't the quarterback, that's a problem. And Rich, the Baltimore Ravens, 3 of the last 5 years have led the league in rushing, including last year. So I think the Baltimore Ravens have to lean into their identity when it matters the most. That has to be their bread and butter. That's how they built the team. And quite honestly, when Baltimore has had high-end success, they've been able to run the football. Lamar Jackson being special is great, but that's not a plan. And I think a lot of the times the Ravens, because Lamar is so dynamic with the ball in his hands, they want to trust him in every single situation and give him every opportunity to impact the game. But sometimes when it comes to the best approach, it's about making sure that you can create opportunities for Lamar to have that big play by forcing the defense to defend something else other than number 8. And so I think that's the one thing that the Baltimore Ravens will be best served to remember as they move through this season. It's why I believe they went out and got Derrick Henry. I still don't understand why they got away from Derrick Henry early on in that game in Kansas City last Thursday night. You saw they had success in that first drive using him. I think they have to have the threat of the run, and it's not just about the production. It's sometimes just about the attempts in order to make sure that there are those opportunities for Lamar Jackson to be dynamic in the passing game.
Yeah, 5 carries for Derrick Henry in that first drive in Kansas City that wound up with him in the end zone for a touchdown, and that was 1 fewer carry by a running back than the Ravens had the entire AFC Championship game lost to the Chiefs. And then he had only 8 carries the rest of the game. I hear you. We'll see what happens against the Raiders later on Sunday for the Ravens home opener. What was your Super Bowl prediction coming into the season? My
Super Bowl prediction was Green Bay against Kansas City. So what was old is new again. I would say the rematch of Super Bowl one. I'm a little shaky on that, seeing what has happened with Jordan Love. We'll see how that thing progresses, but I'm pretty certain about the team I got coming out of the other side of the bracket. They look damn good on opening night.
And so, okay, I guess the Packers, right? I mean, sometimes the football gods find the weakness. We'll see what Malik Willis can do. I don't know, right? Based on what we saw in Tennessee, for the Titans to just send him packing before the season. I understand they got Mason Rudolph, but I'm concerned. I have concerns there.
Yeah, I've got some concerns too. I will say this: the fact that Matt LaFleur, who had success with Ryan Tannehill down in Tennessee, didn't go out there and try to sign him leads me to, and the fact that they didn't put Jordan Love on IR leads me to believe that we're going to see him at some point in the next month. Okay. It's just a matter of what happens over the next couple of games, what happens against the Colts, what happens, I believe, against the Titans. I think if the Green Bay Packers can find a way to get a win over the next 2 weeks, and fingers crossed Jordan Love return back for that Minnesota Vikings game, then I do believe there's going to be an opportunity for them to salvage their season. But they got to figure out a way to get a win over these next 2 games, whether it be against the Indianapolis Colts, which is going to be a tall order, or against the Tennessee Titans.
Chris, pleasure chatting with you here. So you said you didn't really weren't a football guy in your tenure in the Bronx. You are a Yankee fan, at least, right, Chris? Coming from the Bronx.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Let's go. Jazz Chisholm and Aaron Judge and G and all those guys, Juan Soto, let's go.
Did you go to games in the old Yankee Stadium as a kid in the Bronx?
I've gone to games in the old Yankee Stadium. I've gone to games in the new Yankee Stadium. I prefer the old one, but listen, let's hope we get some championship pelts under the new one's belt here soon.
I'm right with you. Chris, thanks for the time. Greatly appreciate it. Look for more of my calls. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks for having me on,
You
Rich.
got it. That's Chris Canty. Check him out on ESPN and ESPN Radio right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.